This episode is brought to you by Zen Aesthetics in Pereira Construction. At Zen Aesthetics in Oak Harbor, experienced esthetician Adrienne Hawkins goes beyond skincare. She nurtures your soul while rejuvenating your skin. Book your appointment today and find your Zen. Visit Zen Aesthetics on Instagram because self-care isn't a luxury, it's a lifestyle. And a big shout out to Pereira Construction, building strong foundations, beautiful spaces, and a better Whidbey one project at a time. Transfer your home with Pereira Island Construction, where owners Mike and Susanna Pereira bring over 30 years of experience to every project. No upfront payments, you pay only when the job is complete and you're satisfied. Contact Mike for a free consultation and visit Pereira Island Construction to learn more. That's Pereira, Pereira, islandconstruction.com. Pereira Island Construction, building trust with quality work. Hey Islanders and anyone who loves a great story. Welcome back to Local Whidbey with Magsy, where we bring you the stories, creativity, and sheer magic of Whidbey Island. Today we're diving headfirst into the world of art, passion, and creative brilliance with the one and only Maria Wickwire, a phenomenal sculpture artist who's redefining what it means to make art come alive. Maria's work isn't just something you see, it's something you feel. Her sculptures tell stories, spark emotions, and remind us that art isn't just about decoration, it's about connection. From the way she molds her materials to the heart and soul she pours into every piece, Maria is the kind of artist who leaves an unforgettable mark, both on her creations and everyone lucky enough to experience them. If you didn't know already, Maria's beautiful sculpture Anillos is front and center at the Price Sculpture Forest in Coupeville. I love it so much and used it in my Instagram post with my trailer for this podcast. She was told about it, and that is how she and I connected. One of my favorite galleries is Museo in Langley. Her pieces are there as well, so you know I just had to interview her. Today we're pulling back the curtain on Maria's journey, how she found her calling, the inspiration behind her incredible sculptures, and what it's like to create art that is placed in a natural wonderland that is Whidbey Island. Whether you're an artist yourself or someone who just appreciates beauty, Maria's story is a testament to following your passion and creating something extraordinary. So settle in and prepare to be blown away. By the end of this episode, you'll see why Maria Wickwire is a true treasure to Whidbey Island. Let's share some magic, shall we? Hi, Maria. It is such an honor to meet you.
Well, thank you for those kind words, Magsy. I hope I can live up to that amazing introduction.
Yeah, I don't think I exaggerated, though.
Well, that's very kind of you to say. We'll see. We'll see what the listeners think.
Let's tell the listener a little bit about you. So I know you live in Skagit Valley on Blue Lake.
Big Lake.
Big Lake? Big Lake?
Big Lake.
Okay, I'm sorry. Big Lake. Why did I think it was blue? Okay.
It is actually.
Listeners, she lives on Big Lake. But you are known on Whidbey Island for the Anillos sculpture residing at the Price Sculpture Forest and your work at Museo Gallery. Do I pronounce that okay?
Mm-hmm. Yes, we are.
In Langley. What brought you to Washington?
Well, that's a good question. I was a teacher in Portland for almost 30 years. And then I married my late husband and moved to Battleground. And my late husband passed away in 2007, and my sweetheart Rick and I met in a online bereavement chat room, and then we became really good friends for a long time. And eventually, he's a fisherman, so he kind of slowly reeled me in until I came up to the Skagit Valley. And then once I arrived in Skagit Valley, I focused on starting my art career over again and connecting in the art communities up here.
Okay. You had a teaching career, correct?
Yes.
For how many years was that?
Almost 30.
30 years. And so what inspired you to sculpt?
Well, first of all, I was always a lifelong learner, and I was learning a lot of things like writing poetry and doing other things. But we had an artist in the school that came just about the time that I was a published poet and menopause was stealing my vocabulary and I couldn't think of the words and I needed
I love
words.
that saying.
But, waiting for the words to bubble out of the laborious tar pits of my memory was just getting really old. And about that time, another artist named Maria Simon, who is an artist in the school, came and wanted to know what we wanted to teach our third graders. And we said, how about teapots? And she did. She came, taught us how to make teapots. But she wouldn't let us help the kids. She gave each teacher a piece of clay, and we had to make our own teapot. And I felt like, oh my God, where have you been all my life? I felt like I had just won the lottery in the middle of my life. I couldn't put it down. I made a couple more teapots.
Play-Doh.
Well, kind of better. And I apparently am obsessed with the figure, because right after I made a couple of teapots, I just started doing figures. And then a friend of mine, her student teacher, said, I think you'd like to study with my my favorite teacher from U of O, Francisco Salgado. He's teaching at the community college. So I went there and I took a class. And
wow.
That was it.
Well, you are very good at figures, that is for sure. So let's talk about Anillos. And that's the correct way to pronounce that, right?
That
okay.
Is.
She clearly is your deepest tie to Whidbey Island. Describe Anillos to the listener and why you created her originally in 2005.
Yes. Okay, well, originally, I created a smaller sculpture that was like maybe a foot high. And it was inspired by a little 4-year-old girl in the Cirque du Soleil. And I don't know if you've ever been to the Cirque du Soleil.
I have.
But there's color and there's music and there's all this stuff going on. And this little family came out, and the parents and the child were all dressed in white. Their leotards covered their heads, their arms, their legs, everything except their faces. And they tossed the little girl around and did some things with her. And then her job was to sit at the edge of the stage, cross-legged. Like we used to say crisscross applesauce to the students. And she had to sit there with her hands in her lap while her parents did all this other stuff. Well, with all the color and activity and music, I couldn't take my eyes off this child. She was a pool of calm in the middle of all of this. And I wanted to capture that feeling in the sculpture. And even though I didn't put the sculpture in the same pose that she was sitting in, I was trying to capture that same feeling. But I got a left turn signal in my brain, and I always take the left turn when I get it. And because I had recently seen a huge old growth log or trunk of a tree that had been knocked down, and you could see literally, there was a flood this year. There's a fire here. There were droughts for these years. You could really
in the lines
and the rings on the tree. And I just got this left turn signal to start carving rings around this figure. And it hit me that, I believe that our life experiences carve themselves into the cells of our bodies, but we don't necessarily look at each other the way we would look at the rings on a tree. And sometimes we miss that that's happened, and we're not as compassionate as we could be. So my thought was that maybe this would be a statement kind of leaning towards compassion for people. And then the city of Lake Oswego has a gallery without walls. And so the Lake Oswego Art Commission, somebody on the commission saw a picture of that little piece. And she said, we would like you to apply to the gallery without walls. And we'd like you to do that piece, but life size. I had never made anything bigger than I could lift. I was not sure I could do it, but I thought, okay, I'm going to give it a try, because if I say no, they'll never ask again.
Right.
If I try and fail, they'll still never ask again, but at least I would have tried. So I thought, I'll just jump off the cliff and build my parachute on the way down.
Yeah, I love that saying.
That tends to be my policy on most things.
I told my husband that saying the other day, and he had some kind of quote, and I said, are you saying that her quote's from a movie? He said, no, it just reminded me of that quote from a movie. Well,
I don't think it's that original. I think I heard it somewhere too.
Oh, did you?
But
okay.
it just feels like that's
a good one.
It feels like that's what you're doing. You're building your parachute. I've heard about
on the way down.
You're flying a plane and you're building it while you're flying.
Right.
Things I've heard that too. But anyway, I decided to just give it a shot. I had to look around for someone who could help me fire it, because I made it in 3 sections in case I had to use my backup plan, which would have been to fire it in my kiln. But if you know anything about making teapots and things, you have to fire the lid on the teapot, or the clay moves when it's being fired, and it won't match. Right. And so I found somebody who was willing to let me fire it in a kiln at a community center, and then a friend of mine made the Corten steel base for me, and he helped me install it. And he since has passed away of cancer, so it's kind of a special thing that he helped me do that. And so, they floated her across the sidewalk on a crane. I'd never seen that before. It was just fun. And then, and she was going to be there for 2 years, and she was going to be for sale. So they asked me to put a price on her, and I put a price on her, and I thought, I hope somebody buys her, because where the heck am I going to put her, or how am I going to move her if she doesn't sell? But at the end of the 2 years, they asked me if I wanted to be in the People's Choice competition, and I had nothing to lose, so I said sure. No thought that she'd ever win, but she did win, and they bought her, so I didn't have to move her. So that was great.
Oh.
And she was there for 12 years.
Wow.
Until something very bad happened.
That's a great segue. So you win the People's Choice, and then an unfortunate event occurred. So what happened to her, sweet Anillos?
Well, there was a mentally disturbed person who lived with his parents, is what I've been told. He was in his 30s, and he could, quote unquote, get himself to and from work by walking down the street. Pastor, I think he worked at the grocery store down the road. Mm-hmm. And every day he would walk by and push her, and he pushed her, and he pushed her, and he rocked her, and he rocked her. And finally, he was able to break the bolts and rock her off the pedestal, and she landed on her head and shattered all over the sidewalk. Oh. And they didn't prosecute him because he didn't think he had done anything wrong. You know, people that are mentally ill, he just stood there, and people said, what happened? He said, I did it. You know, and so they gathered up. They didn't know if they were going to prosecute or not, so they gathered up all the pieces, and they put them in a box and kept them for evidence for a couple of years, for a year. And then I got them back right during the pandemic.
Okay, during the pandemic. Yeah. So that's when we start leading this conversation towards Whidbey Island. So when you finally felt like opening up that box of all her shattered pieces, did you know immediately that she was going to be made whole again?
I wasn't confident of it. I had suggested to the Lake Oswego people, because they were going to get some insurance money for her destruction, but how much they insured her for was way less than it would have costed to bronze her. And they said that they didn't think they had enough money to do the bronze thing. So, but it was my idea originally to say, what if I put her back together and then we cast her in bronze and then we highlight the cracks like they do in the Japanese art form of repairing ceramics with gold. Because what that means is that they're honoring the scars and they're honoring the healing. And so I thought, since her story, if it had been any other sculpture, I would have just said, sweep it up and toss it. But this one, the story of her life, the little girl, you know, was like a white sheet of paper that hadn't been written on. And then the rings was a slightly more mature figure and had a little more life experience. Well, by the time I blew it up to life size, the rings had to get wider apart because I was trying to put them in the same places. Then she had more texture in between. She had much more life experience. And this was another life experience, this trauma. Sure was. And so I thought, since this trauma is part of her life experience, it makes sense to do this. So I thought, whether I keep her or whether I cast her in bronze, I should put her back together. But I didn't know if I could. So I opened it up, and seriously, I had a couple of big pieces, and everything from like half of her face down to dust. I mean, big parts of it, lots of her head were missing. If you look on my Instagram page, you can see videos of how much was missing. But I thought, one piece at a time, I could try. I'm not a jigsaw puzzle person. Right. I don't like 2D jigsaw puzzles, and I really didn't want to do a 3D one. But for her, and I had my daughter-in-law and son-in-law helped find some of the pieces. And every time I was about to give up, I would find a critical one. And the hardest one was her right eye, because I'm right-handed, so it's easy for me to sculpt the left eye. Right. It's harder to sculpt the right eye. And not finding that, I was worried that I wasn't going to be able to sculpt the same eye that I had done before and make her face look the same. Yeah. But I wanted her face and her hands to look the same, because then I thought if she could look like she looked before, then she'd be familiar to people. Right. So that's what I did.
So is she your first bronze sculpture?
Yes. Actually, she is.
What was the process of that? Because I know someone in Seattle did that for you.
Yes, well, again, the art community is something very special. When you have good friends that are good artists and that are generous, which they mostly are. I went to my art friends up here who were bronze sculptors, and one I'd never even met before, but he spent 2 hours on the phone coaching me through stuff. And Andrew Valley of the Smith and Valley Gallery pointed me to the Classic Foundry in Seattle. And I went there. And so what they do is they make a mold of the piece, and they cast the piece in bronze, but you get the piece back. The mold is just what they use to make the ceramic mold that they pour the bronze into. And because bronze will shrink a little bit, the bronze piece is just a slight bit smaller than the original clay piece was, because they can't be the exact same size, because it shrinks when it cools. They cast her pieces, then they welded all the pieces together, and then they patinaed the pieces the thing. And actually, it turned out kind of better in some ways than the original one, because the original one was fired clay, and it had kind of an all over the same color. Whereas when they put the patina on Anillos at the forest, she has highlights on her forehead and her nose, and so she looks a little more subtle that way. And then she has 18 karat gold in the cracks.
So this is so good to know, because I just assumed when you said that they bronzed her, that they bronzed the actual clay piece. Yeah. Like you just pour it over it.
No, I know a lot of people think that, but but again, and it's not unusual to think that, but I was kind of not thinking it all the way through either, because I didn't realize, they're going to give me the pieces back, because she had, her body was one piece from her knees down to her feet, and one hand it was the second piece, and her head was a third piece, and they cast them in those different pieces. Well, I didn't expect that I was going to get all those back, but of course I did. And then I had a choice. Is she going to go to a landfill, or am I going to let her, trip over her in the studio for the rest of my life, or am I going to put her back together? So I did put her back together, and I had the original pedestal, so she's on that now. Okay. Outside my studio.
Yeah. I saw that today. Yeah. I was privileged for you to take me around and see your studio. It's amazing. Listener, it's really nice. And we got to discuss pieces that are in there. When we get to the end of our conversation, we'll talk about where people can find you. But yes, that was very nice seeing that and seeing all the pieces that you've done. Tell me how Scott Price knew about the rebirth of Anillos and wanting her in the sculpture forest.
Well, again, I think, when you're doing what you're supposed to do, the world lines up in your favor. It's sort of like all the iron filings start going toward the magnet. Because when I first started sculpting, and then I found my teacher, and then I started showing, and then I belonged to a group, and I still belong to this group, Pacific Northwest Sculptors down in Portland. So it was a great 3D artist group, which we don't have one of those up here. So I still belong to that group. And during the pandemic, they were putting on Zoom presentations, and Scott had just developed this sculpture forest, and they asked him to present a presentation about the sculpture forest to them. And so I'm watching this, and I'm thinking, wow, this is cool. And I had just gotten these pieces back. And so I contacted Scott, and I asked him if I were to put this piece back together, would you want that piece as a permanent piece in your sculpture forest? And he said, yes, he definitely would. So what we did was I contracted with the foundry to make the mold, and then Scott contracted with them to cast it. Right. So then they just delivered it and installed it for him. Yeah. And then we unveiled it, and it was so cute because the city councilwoman and the mayor and everybody of Coupeville were there, and it was just really sweet. And they had these ginormous scissors. Oh my God. Yes. to cut the
like a business opening.
Yeah, it was really kind of cute. I didn't expect all that.
The rebirth and the coming out of Anillos back to life is kind of
and I wasn't sure if I would name her the same or if I would call her Anillos Reborn, but I just decided to just call her Anillos.
No, I'm glad you did, because here's my thing: is when I saw that and loved it and did a little research, and then you contacted me and said that Scott had seen it on my Instagram. And then I started doing research. This is really touchy-feely what I'm going to say, but it just reminds me of, especially, it can be anyone's lives, but let's just go with women. You were just saying that this young man that tried to snuff her out kept pushing her every day. Yeah. And finally, he was able to push her over, and she busted everywhere. Well, that should have been the end of her. But little by little, you put those pieces back together. Yep. And she is back. She's the same name,
but she's stronger.
She's stronger. She's wiser. She has more rings around her. But she's even more beautiful to me. I mean, in being in that beautiful setting in the sculpture garden, I just think it would mean a lot to anybody, but especially to women, because that happens to a lot of us. We just keep getting pushed until we break.
Yeah, and there's something about, they told me he was so-called triggered by
Mm-hmm.
her. And that's always the excuse, that somehow it's your fault, you triggered something.
Yes.
And
Yeah. And so that's one thing that I really love about her. Plus, she's so pretty. You've done such a good job. You do such a good job
it's
with
funny
faces.
because so many women that I know and women that I don't know, I mean, the day we put her in there, we were having lunch at my favorite place in Coopville, the Front Street Grill. We were having lunch there, and Scott texted me and said that this couple had just come through and gone through the whole forest. And he said, I always ask people what their favorite piece was. And she said, this one. And she went right to Anillos, and she'd only been there for like an hour. So,
wow. Okay, so let me ask you something that I'm asking all of my guests. Okay. Who or what has been the most significant influence on your life, and why? And when I say what, it could also be a story, a life story. It doesn't have to be a person, but yeah, I'm just curious about that.
This is a really easy one for me. All my life, starting with my mother, I have been inspired by teachers. And they've always teachers that were lifelong learners themselves. That teacher, my fourth grade teacher, who wrote a book with her daughter, and I remember thinking, well, if she could write a book, maybe I could write a book, which I did later in my life. And then more specifically, my teacher from Cisco Salgado, who was this guy that was teaching at the Portland Community College, and the class was the proportions of the figures. So he would say, we're not doing art here. We're building them up and tearing them down. We're not getting too precious about anything. If her boobs are up too high, we're going to cut them off and move them. She won't feel a thing. If her ears are in the wrong place, we're going to move them. She won't feel a thing. And I still hear his voice.
Right.
If you can do it once, you can do it again just as well or better. So don't get too precious about anything. Great, great advice. And he challenged us to do so many wonderful things, including write a proposal for public art, which helped me when later on, like Oswego asked me to do it. I had done it in practice in his class, which was really cool. But I thought of myself as probably just going to be a hobby artist and give my things away to people. And he's like, no. He kicked me out of the class after I took it twice and said, no, you need to start showing in galleries. So he invited me to a sculptor's picnic at his house, where we had to bring 10 slides, each of us. That's the days of the slides. And we all had to show our slides, and mine held up with these people who have work in the Portland Art Museum and other big collections, and they were acting like it was real stuff. Yeah. And I was like, wow. And then he sat me down at the dining room table with the guy who had recommended I take the class from him. And they said, go see this gallery because they're into emerging artists, get out there. And so when the Lake Oswego thing came up, I thought, what would Francisco do? Well, he'd just jump off the cliff and build his parachute on the way down. And he was so proud of me because I got a piece into that collection before he got a piece into it.
Oh, wow.
And he was just that kind of person. And so for me now, I want to pay it forward, and I encourage other artists the same way that I was encouraged. Because, I mean, if it hadn't been for him, Anillos wouldn't be in that forest right now. And just a while back, last summer, he and his wife came up to visit, and we have a picture of him and me and my student and studio assistant Tia all together with Anillos.
Oh, that's great. That's a great thing to have.
Yeah.
Okay, besides the sculpture forest, do you have other favorite areas of the island?
Well, I must say I need to explore the island more because I'm not going to have a very long list, but I do love Coopville and Langley both because they're just such cute little towns, and there's just so much fun stuff to do. We always like to take our dog and go for picnics in Bowman Bay, which we like. And and then I have a sister-in-law who lives down by the ferry in Clinton area. Okay. And on a lake down there. So that's pretty much all I have explored on the island. And I know there's many more things to do, and I need to do that.
Yeah. My husband bought me a hiking trail book when we first moved. And there are just, there are the places everybody goes, but there's so many other places from one of those alone. Yeah. And also following PNW Birdie, Todd Hipsher, following him and seeing all the different places. He and I were talking about that as well. He never runs out of places, and he'll return to his favorite ones. But he tries to find something new every walk. So what was it? 37 miles of Whidbey Island.
He's going to be a good resource for me.
Absolutely. Okay. So a precious part of you lives on Whidbey Island. That's how I call it. A precious part of you.
She is.
What's a lesson the Whidbey Island community has taught you?
I think that my eyes have been open to the wonderful variety available in island life. I've never lived on an island myself, but I see that, and I think it's exciting that Whidbey Island is creating a wonderful destination for people to embrace the arts in a variety of ways. And it also shows to me what I see in the little towns. It shows the power of participation on a local level.
Yep.
To see the connections that people can make with each other.
Right.
And as you know, when I put Anillos together during the pandemic, I was very emotionally upset by what was going on in our country, all the fragmenting and splintering of all of these things. And she just seemed, when she fell and was broken, to just be a visual image of what was going on in our world, and all, people, families, friends not talking to each other, things that were happening. And so when I put her back together, my hope, my really fervent hope, is that she will symbolize putting us all back together and cherishing those healing scars, and not holding things against each other anymore, and getting it back together. And so I think it starts in small places.
That's a great analogy for sure. Tell the listener where they can find you, all the different places, whether it's online, social media, website, art, things that you have coming up. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, if you go to the Price Sculpture Forest, there's a little QR code, but next to a little plaque next to the sculpture, so you can learn more about her. And I think there's probably a link on there to my website, which is mariawickwire.studio.com. And I'm on Facebook and Instagram, both under Maria Wickwire Studio. And on those sites, I post about everything that's coming up. Right now, I have work at Museo Gallery. I have work at the Rick Leonard Gallery in Mount Vernon. I have work at Smith and Valley Gallery in Edison. I have work at the Museum of Northwest Art Store. So I work in all of those places. I will be doing a solo show at Museo in, I think, September of 2025, and hopefully another solo show at Smith and Valley in 2026.
Well, great. I really appreciate you making time for me.
Oh, it's been fun.
And like everyone will realize as you listen to more and more podcasts, I really do like to meet with those that I interview in person, opposed to the Zoom and all that kind of thing. And so it's important to me to really get to know that person. And I feel like I've gotten to know you better. And I really appreciate you making time for me. And I know the listeners are going to enjoy this.
It's been so much fun. And I actually really appreciate getting to know you too.
Thank you.
Because I feel like that's been a two-way street here.
Absolutely.
And that's been really good.
Yes.
Yeah, it's been delightful. Good. Well, I wish you the best on this podcast. I think it's going to be really fun for people.
So far, it has been really fun.
Yeah, I think people are going to love it.
Okay, great.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Maria.
Thank you.
That's a wrap on another episode of Local Whidbey with Magsy. Whether you're all about island life or just island bound in spirit, I hope you all are audacious islanders. Yes, that is a plug for my merch. Thanks for tuning in and celebrating the people, places, and magic that make Whidbey Island so special. Don't forget to share the love, tell a friend, leave a review if you have something positive to say, and follow along for more stories from our audacious island. Until next time, keep it quirky, keep it local, and keep loving Whidbey. Looking to create a life filled with connection, creativity, and a little bit of audacious charm? At withmagsy.com, we bring people together in all the best ways. Join the Supper Club, where food, laughter, and great company make every gathering unforgettable. Tune in to the Local Whidbey with Magsy podcast, celebrating the small businesses and bold dreamers that make up audacious islanders and shape Whidbey Island. Transform your home with Spaces, a personalized interior styling service that reflects your style and brings your space to life. Ready to gather, be inspired, and make your space truly yours? Visit withmagsy.com today.